Hello, dear viewers and readers. Welcome to a special episode of Crime Files. Shocking cases where we explore true stories, unsolved mysteries, and the criminals who spread terror and forever altered the security landscape of the world. Today, we will dive deep into one of the most haunting serial murder cases in American history, a story of darkness hiding in the light, of irreparable loss, and of the relentless manhunt to bring a ruthless killer into the open. This is not just a story about crime, it is also a story about people, about families torn apart, and about the courage of those who refuse to give up hope even when facing the darkest of adversities. Together, we will follow each chapter of this tragedy from the first moments of suspicion, to the peak of fear, and finally, to the unyielding pursuit of justice. If you're a fan of true crime investigations, shocking stories, and the uncovering of historical mysteries, don't hesitate to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any episode in this special series. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue bringing you the most in-depth and high-quality content. Now, let us journey back in time to a town that once seemed peaceful, where the terror known as the Night Weaver began. The crisp autumn air of Havenwood, Massachusetts, usually carried the comforting scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, a gentle harbinger of the approaching holiday season. But by late October, an unfamiliar chill had settled over the quiet, historic town, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. It began subtly, a whisper of unease, before blossoming into a full-blown scream of terror that would forever scar the town's idyllic facade. It was a Tuesday when the first thread of fear was woven. Evelyn Reed, a retired librarian known for her meticulously tended rose garden and her even more meticulously organized life, failed to show up for her weekly book club meeting. Her friends, a tight-knit group of septuagenarians, exchanged concerned glances. Evelyn was never late. Evelyn was never absent. A quick phone call yielded no answer, only the automated, polite chime of her voicemail. Martha Higgins, Evelyn's closest friend, decided to make a detour on her way home. Martha found the front door of Evelyn's charming Victorian house slightly ajar, a detail that immediately set her teeth on edge. Evelyn was fastidious about security. Calling out her friend's name, Martha pushed the door open, her heart beginning to thump an anxious rhythm against her ribs. The house was unnervingly quiet. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the kitchen counter, still warm to the touch. Evelyn's reading glasses lay beside it, a bookmark peeking from a paperback novel. It was as if she had simply vanished mid-sentence. Martha's eyes scanned the living room, noting the neatly arranged cushions, the polished antique furniture, and then her gaze snagged on something out of place. On the mantelpiece, above a gas fireplace that Evelyn rarely used, was a small, intricately woven piece of fabric. It was no bigger than Martha's palm, composed of various threads, silk, wool, even what looked like strands of human hair, all meticulously knotted and intertwined into a complex, almost geometric pattern. It was beautiful, in a haunting, alien way, and utterly foreign to Evelyn's minimalist decor. Martha touched it, a shiver running down her spine at the cold, taut feel of the material. She tried to dismiss it as a strange gift Evelyn had received, but the unsettling feeling persisted. By the time Detective Miles Corbin arrived an hour later, called by a now frantic Martha, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across Evelyn's lawn. Corbin was a man carved from granite and weariness, his face etched with years of staring into the abyss of human cruelty. Havenwood wasn't a town accustomed to missing persons, let alone anything more sinister. A stolen bicycle, maybe a noisy teenager, those were the typical calls. A missing elderly woman from her locked house was a red flag the size of a billboard. "No forced entry, Martha?" Corbin asked, his voice a low rumble. "None, Miles. The door was just open. Like she stepped out for a second and never came back." Martha wrung her hands. "And that thing on the mantelpiece? That wasn't there this morning. I helped her clean last week. It wasn't there." Corbin examined the woven artifact. His gloved fingers traced the unusual threads, feeling the unsettling precision of the knots. He wasn't a forensic expert, but he knew enough to recognize something meticulously crafted. It wasn't just a random item. It was a statement, a chilling, silent declaration. He bagged it carefully, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of frustration. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no forced entry. It was as if Evelyn Reed had simply evaporated, leaving behind only a half-finished cup of tea and a mysterious, meticulously woven calling card. The police chief, a jovial man named Chief Thompson who preferred community barbecues to crime scenes, initially downplayed the incident, suggesting Evelyn might have simply decided to visit family unannounced. But Corbin knew better. The knot on the mantelpiece screamed a different story. 3 days later, the first body was found. It was Sarah Jenkins, a 20-something freelance artist who lived alone in a renovated loft above the old bakery downtown. Her landlord, noticing a strange smell and an accumulation of newspapers, called the police. The scene was gruesome yet oddly pristine. Sarah's body lay on her studio floor, meticulously posed amidst her vibrant, unfinished canvases. She had been strangled, the ligature mark around her neck deep and precise, and on her chest, secured by a single, almost delicate pin, was another woven artifact. This one was larger than Evelyn's, more complex, incorporating strands of vibrant colored yarn that matched the hues of Sarah's own artwork. It looked like a macabre, artistic signature. Corbin felt a cold dread seep into his bones. 2 women, 2 disappearances, 1 dead, and the same chilling signature. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was deliberate, methodical, and terrifying. The same knot pattern, Corbin muttered, staring at the forensic photos of the artifact. The same intricate weave. But this one feels personal. Detective Anya Sharma, Corbin's younger, sharper partner, nodded, her face grim. He's telling a story, Miles. Or maybe he's creating one. He leaves his mark, clear as day, but gives us nothing else. Sharma had a knack for seeing patterns where others saw chaos, a talent that both impressed and sometimes frustrated Corbin. The fabric itself is different for each victim, but the method of weaving, the type of knot, it's identical. The news of Sarah Jenkins's murder shattered Havenwood's illusion of safety. Panic rippled through the town. Locksmiths worked overtime. Security system companies saw an unprecedented surge in calls. Parents kept their children indoors, and neighbors, once friendly and open, eyed each other with suspicion. The police force, unprepared for such a sophisticated and brutal crime, was overwhelmed. Chief Thompson, his jovial demeanor replaced by a haunted look, called in the state police and the FBI. The media descended like vultures, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrust into the faces of frightened residents. Havenwood Horror, The Knot Killer, the Midnight Weaver sensational headlines screamed from every newspaper and television screen. The killer's chilling signature earned him the moniker that would forever be associated with the terror he unleashed. Corbin felt the weight of the town's fear on his shoulders. He walked the crime scenes, spoke to the victims' families, and pored over every scrap of evidence. But the Weaver remained an enigma. There were no witnesses who saw Sarah abducted, no struggle heard. Just like Evelyn Reed, she had vanished silently before reappearing in death, marked by the killer's unsettling artistry. The FBI profiler, Dr. Eleanor Vance, arrived a week later. She was a woman of steely intellect and unnerving composure, her eyes missing nothing. After examining the crime scenes and the 2 woven artifacts, her assessment was chilling. "This is not a disorganized killer, Detective Corbin," Dr. Vance stated, her voice calm but firm. "This individual is highly intelligent, meticulous, and patient. The knots aren't just a signature. They're a ritual. He's creating something. These aren't just victims. They are components in his macabre tapestry." "A tapestry of what?" Corbin asked, the frustration evident in his voice. "Control," Vance replied, her gaze fixed on the forensic photograph of the knot on Sarah's chest. "And perhaps legacy. He wants to be seen. He wants his work to be admired or at least acknowledged. He believes he's an artist, and his medium is human life. The realization hit Corbin with the force of a physical blow. They weren't hunting a simple murderer driven by passion or greed. They were hunting a monster with an agenda, a twisted vision, and an almost artistic precision. The quiet terror of Havenwood was just the beginning. The Midnight Weaver was only just starting to weave his deadly tale, and the town, unknowingly, was caught in its first terrifying thread. Evelyn Reed's body remained unfound, a ghost haunting the edges of the investigation, a constant reminder of the killer's mastery of disappearance. The cold autumn wind now seemed to carry the whispers of the unseen, the silent terror that had descended upon Havenwood, threatening to unravel the very fabric of its peace. Months bled into a grim winter, then a hesitant spring, but the shadow of the Midnight Weaver never lifted from Havenwood. The initial panic had solidified into a pervasive, weary dread. The body count had climbed steadily, reaching a terrifying total of 5 confirmed murders and 2 still missing, presumed dead victims, including Evelyn Reed. Each new discovery was a fresh wound, a stark reminder of the monster lurking in their midst. The Weaver's pattern, while horrifyingly consistent in its signature knots, remained frustratingly elusive in its victim selection. There was Evelyn, the retired librarian, Sarah, the freelance artist. Then came Michael Peterson, a young, aspiring musician, Eleanor Vance, no relation to the profiler, a struggling single mother working 2 jobs, and finally, Robert Chen, a quiet antique restorer. Their ages, social strata, and lifestyles were disparate. The only commonality was their perceived solitude. Each lived alone, or had a schedule that often left them isolated, making their disappearances less conspicuous until it was too late. Detective Miles Corbin, now a gaunt shadow of his former self, was living and breathing the case. His office desk was buried under stacks of victim profiles, forensic reports, and maps of Havenwood riddled with pins marking crime scenes. Sleep was a luxury he rarely afforded, haunted by the faces of the victims and the intricate, mocking knots that were the killer's only true communication. His marriage was under immense strain, his family seeing only a ghost of the man they once knew. "We need a break, Miles," Detective Sharma urged one frigid morning, sliding a fresh coffee across his desk. "A real lead, not just another piece of the puzzle that fits nowhere." "He's too careful, Anya," Corbin growled, rubbing his temples. "No forced entry, no struggle reported by neighbors, no usable DNA at most scenes thanks to his meticulousness. It's like he walks through walls." Dr. Eleanor Vance, the FBI profiler, had become an almost permanent fixture in Havenwood. Her observations, while chilling, had been invaluable. "He preys on the isolated," she had explained during one of their countless strategy meetings. "Individuals whose routines are predictable, whose absence might not be immediately noticed. He targets them, observes them, then strikes with surgical precision. The knots, they evolve. Each one is a little more complex, a little more personal to the victim's life. He's learning, adapting, perfecting his craft." The most recent victim, Robert Chun, had been found in his cluttered antique shop, posed amidst his restored treasures. The knot on his chest had incorporated fine threads of silk and gold, mimicking the intricate patterns of the antique tapestries he worked on. It was a grotesque tribute, a horrifying fusion of the victim's life and the killer's morbid artistry. The sheer audacity of the killer, striking in plain sight in a town now hypervigilant, terrified the residents. A self-imposed curfew had fallen over Havenwood. Streets that once bustled with evening strolls and lively restaurant patios were now deserted after dusk. Children were no longer allowed to walk to school alone. The annual Founders' Day festival, a beloved tradition for generations, had been canceled. Havenwood, once a symbol of small-town charm, had become synonymous with fear. One night, a glimmer of hope pierced the oppressive gloom. A break, however small. A witness, elderly Mrs. Agnes Miller, who lived across from Robert Chen's shop, had been woken by a noise the night of his murder. She hadn't seen much, just a dark, older model sedan boxy, like from the 70s or 80s. She described it idling briefly down the street before pulling away without its lights on. She couldn't recall the make or plate, but she remembered something else. A faint, peculiar scent. Like old leather and something sweet, she'd said, sniffing the air as if the phantom smell still lingered. Like those potpourri bags my granddaughter makes, but deeper, earthier. Corbin and Sharma pursued the lead relentlessly. Old sedans were abundant, but the unique scent was a narrow focus. They canvassed garages, auto shops, and car clubs, searching for anyone who fit the profile. It was a needle in a haystack, but it was something. Then the taunt. A package arrived at the Havenwood Police Department, addressed simply to Detective Corbin. Inside, nestled in a bed of dried leaves and wood shavings, was another woven artifact. It was small, a miniature version of the larger knots, but unlike the others, it didn't use victim-specific materials. Instead, it was woven from thin, almost invisible strands, and at its center, meticulously integrated, was a small, tarnished police badge. Not a real one, but a cheap replica, perhaps from a child's toy. Corbin felt a cold rage surge through him. The killer was mocking them. He was aware of their pursuit, enjoying the chase. Dr. Vance, examining the package, confirmed his fears. He's escalating, detective. He's no longer just an artist. He's now a storyteller, incorporating the narrative of the hunt into his work. This isn't just a taunt. It's a challenge. He wants you to know he's watching. The implications were terrifying. The Midnight Weaver wasn't just in their town. He was among them. He could be anyone, the quiet neighbor, the unassuming shopkeeper, the person you passed on the street every day. The paranoia within the police department itself began to fester. The task force redoubled its efforts. They pored over the remaining cold cases in Havenwood, searching for any historical connection, any forgotten detail that might link to the Weaver. They cross-referenced every person of interest, every strange incident report, every individual who had ever been known to collect or create intricate weavings. One evening, sifting through old police reports, Sharma stumbled upon something. A vandalism report from 5 years prior, almost forgotten. A local elementary school's art project, a large, community-made tapestry, had been meticulously unraveled and rewoven into a series of complex, geometric knots, then carefully reattached to the school wall. The report had dismissed it as a bizarre, perhaps artistic, prank. The only detail of significance was a witness who claimed to have seen a dark, boxy car, parked nearby late at night. Miles! Sharma's voice was barely a whisper as she slid the report across the desk. Look at the description of the knots. And the car. Corbin's blood ran cold as he read it. The description of the woven patterns was eerily similar to the Midnight Weaver's signature. The car was described as a dark sedan, possibly an older model, like a 70s or 80s vehicle. And then, a detail that made his heart pound. The witness also noted a faint, sweet, earthy smell emanating from the vehicle, like strong potpourri or dried herbs. The same scent Agnes Miller had described. The same boxy car. 5 years ago, the Midnight Weaver hadn't just appeared. He had been here, honing his craft, practicing his macabre art, waiting for his moment to elevate his work from inanimate objects to living, breathing canvases. The realization sent a jolt of renewed determination through Corbin. They had a timeline. They had a starting point. They had a potential first victim, the art project itself. The Weaver wasn't just out there. He had deep roots in Havenwood. The next step wasn't just to find him, but to understand what had turned a meticulous vandal into a serial killer. Before Havenwood was completely unraveled by his deadly threads, the hunt was no longer just for a monster. It was for a ghost that had been haunting their town for far longer than anyone had ever imagined. The discovery of the 5-year-old vandalism report, coupled with Mrs. Miller's testimony, ignited a firestorm of renewed investigative energy. The task force, now a lean, efficient machine forged in the crucible of despair, began to meticulously cross-reference every Havenwood resident who owned an older, dark sedan, particularly those with an interest in textiles, art, or anything that might lead to the peculiar earthy, sweet scent. The list, initially sprawling, began to narrow. Among the names that surfaced was Arthur Finch. He was a quiet man in his late 50s, an archivist at the Havenwood Historical Society. He owned a meticulously maintained, dark green 1982 Volvo 240, a car that perfectly fit the boxy, older model description. Finch was known for his solitary nature, his encyclopedic knowledge of local history, and his peculiar hobby, intricate knot tying, a skill he had supposedly learned during a brief stint in the Merchant Marines decades ago. He occasionally gave lectures at the local community center on the lost art of nautical knot tying. His home, a small, unassuming cottage on the outskirts of town, was filled with preserved specimens of rare herbs and botanicals, which he used to create his own unique potpourri, a blend he affectionately called Havenwood Hearth. Corbin and Sharma felt a prickle of unease as they reviewed Finch's profile. He was unremarkable, almost invisible, the perfect shadow. Dr. Vance, when presented with the information, nodded slowly. The unremarkable ones are often the most dangerous, detective. They learn to blend, to observe without being observed. An archivist, a historian. He controls narratives, just as he controls his victims' final moments. A discreet surveillance operation was initiated. For days, Arthur Finch went about his mundane routine, meticulously cataloging old documents, taking solitary walks through the historic cemetery, and returning to his quiet home where he often spent evenings in his dimly lit study, surrounded by books and the faint, sweet scent of his potpourri. He was a creature of habit, precise and methodical. Too precise, too methodical. One evening, as Finch meticulously polished the wooden frame of an antique map, Corbin and Sharma watched from a discreet distance. Finch paused, holding a delicate, almost invisible thread between his fingers, gently tying it into a small, complex knot. He smiled faintly to himself, a private, almost childlike satisfaction on his face. It was the smile of an artist appreciating his own work. It was the smile of the midnight weaver. The moment of truth arrived with a pre-dawn raid. A tactical team swarmed Finch's cottage, moving with practiced silence. Finch, surprisingly, offered no resistance. He was found in his study, sitting at his desk, a half-finished knot in his hands. His eyes, though calm, held a chilling knowingness. The search of the cottage was a chilling descent into the killer's twisted mind. Every room was immaculately organized, but beneath the veneer of order lay the horrifying truth. In a hidden compartment in his study, behind a false bookshelf, they found a macabre collection. Personal effects from each victim, a locket from Evelyn, a paint-splattered brush from Sarah, a sheet of music from Michael, a worn locket from Eleanor, a delicate carving tool from Robert. And beside them, carefully labeled and dated, were the original, larger versions of the woven knots found on each body, alongside detailed journals. The journals were Arthur Finch's magnum opus, his twisted autobiography. They documented his growing obsession with order and control in a world he perceived as chaotic. He saw himself as a remedial weaver, mending the frayed edges of society, giving meaning to lives he deemed unraveled. Each victim was chosen not for who they were, but for what they represented to him, a loose thread in the fabric of Havenwood that needed to be rewoven or cut. Evelyn Reed, for example, was the forgotten story, her life needing a definitive ending. Sarah Jenkins, the artist, was the chaotic palette, needing a master's guiding hand. The knots weren't just signatures. They were his twisted attempts to impose his vision, to create a final, perfect narrative for each life. And in a horrific revelation, Evelyn Reed's body, meticulously preserved and adorned with the first foundational knot, was discovered in a hidden, airtight cellar beneath Finch's home, a grotesque centerpiece in his private gallery of horrors. The motive was not hate, or lust, or greed. It was a terrifying delusion of grandeur, a god complex born from profound isolation and a desperate need for control. He believed he was an artist, and Havenwood was his canvas. The arrest of Arthur Finch sent shockwaves through Havenwood, then a collective sigh of relief. The monster had a face, a name, a seemingly innocuous existence that made his crimes all the more horrifying. The trials were long and arduous, the evidence overwhelming. Finch sat impassively through it all, occasionally offering a cryptic smile to the prosecution or the victims' families, a silent acknowledgement of his work. He was ultimately found guilty on all counts and sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. Detective Miles Corbin, after the verdict, finally allowed himself to sleep a full night. The bags under his eyes remained, but the haunted look began to recede. He had saved Havenwood, but the cost had been immense. His marriage slowly healed, but the scars of the Midnight Weaver would forever remain. Anya Sharma continued her stellar career, rising through the ranks, her experience on the Weaver case making her one of the state's most formidable detectives. Dr. Eleanor Vance returned to the FBI, but the Havenwood case became a benchmark in her profiling work, a chilling example of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Havenwood slowly began to rebuild. The fear dissipated, replaced by a quiet resilience. The Founders' Day festival was reinstated, albeit with tighter security. Neighbors cautiously reconnected, now with a deeper appreciation for their community and the fragile peace they once took for granted. But the memory of the Midnight Weaver, of the terror he inflicted, and the chilling artistry of his knots, would forever be etched into the town's history. Every autumn, as the leaves began to fall and the air grew crisp, a subtle chill would return, a silent reminder of the shadow that once fell over Havenwood, and the meticulous, terrifying craft of the man who wove the final, deadly knot. The story of Arthur Finch, the Midnight Weaver, became a somber legend, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones, reminding everyone that true horror often wears the most ordinary of faces.